Hello, everyone, and welcome. Some of the stories we have for you right now. A last-minute 30-day reprieve. Donald Trump agrees to extend the deadline for sweeping tariffs against Canada.
Canada is very tough. They're very, very tough to do business with.
But the anger and anxiety is still there for businesses and consumers on both sides of the border.
Let's had a very wild ride.
Taking stock of how Donald Trump's threat is affecting the markets and the embattled loonie.
I'm going to try and buy as much Canadian products as I can.
A homegrown shopping guide on how and where to buy Canadian if it comes to it.
Stand up for Canada and be strong.
That's super nice to see.
Plus, how it's all leading to a surge in true patriot love.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Donald Trump was busy working the phones today, talking to the leaders of Canada and Mexico. In the morning, he gave Mexico a reprieve, a one-month extension on imposing those 25% tariffs after President Sheinbaum agreed to put thousands of troops on the border. Canada had to wait a bit longer and take a second phone call. That happened around 3 p.m. The Prime Minister and the President speaking for a good chunk of time before we got word of at least a 30-day reprieve with certain conditions at play. Earlier today, I spoke with CTV's chief political correspondent, Vashi Kapellas, who gave us the details. Okay, Vashi, 30-day reprieve?
30-day reprieve, that's the headline, Sandy. Breathe at least a month-long sigh of relief, the Prime Minister putting on X just moments ago. I just had a good call with President Trump. Canada is implementing our $1.3 billion border plan, reinforcing the border with new choppers, technology, and personnel, enhanced coordination with our American partners, and increased resources to stop the flow of fentanyl. Nearly 10,000 frontline personnel are and will be working on protecting the border. 10,000 also the number of troops that Mexico announced would be heading to their border. The statement goes on to say from the Prime Minister, Sandy, in addition, and this is all new, Canada is making new commitments to appoint a fentanyl czar. We will list cartels as terrorists, ensure 24/7 eyes on the border, launch a Canada-U.S. joint strike force to combat organized crime, fentanyl, and money laundering. I have also, the Prime Minister writes, signed a new intelligence directive on organized crime and fentanyl, and we will be, backing it up with $200 million. Proposed tariffs, and here is the headline, Sandy, will be paused for at least 30 days while we work together. So the crisis we thought would be taking place as of midnight tonight is averted for at least a month.
Okay, and that buys us some time, but it sounds as though there's a long checklist of things to happen. Canada's already committed to border security. We've already said that we're going to be working towards making sure that fentanyl doesn't cross the border. So does it seem to you that Donald Trump was just looking for a little more from us?
It's a great question, and I think if I could figure out exactly what Donald Trump was looking for, I would perhaps have figured out our national and international crisis at this point. But I take exactly what you mean, right? Like, I think the pretext of this in the executive order was the border. But just 2 hours ago, he was talking about annexing us and making us the 51st state and how terrible a trading relationship we have and how bad that we have been to him, in his view, or to the United States. So I would say, like, my conclusion out of all of this is we may be breathing a sigh of relief at the moment for the next 30 days. But I think that the president still sees utility, whether, the facts bear it out or not, and in most cases they do not, of tariffs, particularly in raising revenue and as a thing, as he said, a beautiful thing. So I would be nervous to think that this is, crossing the finish line, or we will avert the application of these tariffs on a permanent basis. I think he still sees them as a useful policy tool, which means, the pressure is on, and we'll see what happens in 30 days. But 30 days is better than them coming into effect tomorrow.
That's for sure. Okay, Vashi, thank you. Okay, so that was Vashi a little earlier today about the at least 30-day reprieve on tariffs. Let's bring in CTV's senior political correspondent, Mike LeCouture. Okay, the threat of tariffs, Mike, is still there. We heard about all of this. We heard about the news, the details of the news, in a tweet from Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Have we heard anything yet from Donald Trump since that conversation between the two men?
Yeah, we have, and it's interesting because he did speak about the plan that Justin Trudeau put before him, and he actually quoted from Justin Trudeau's post on X and really sort of talked about what he has gotten out of Canada, how happy he is, and this is just from his Truth Social post, which we know is his own social media website, and he said he is happy that they have finally agreed to secure the northern border, saying finally end the deadly scourge of drugs like fentanyl that have been pouring into our country, killing millions of Americans, as he says. Now, once again, the question of whether or not it is pouring into their country from our country, that is something that Canada continues to try and make a case against. But I think what's interesting when you look at the motivation behind Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and where he wants to go with this, I think you have to look towards the end of that post, where he said that he is pleased with this initial outcome, that the tariffs will be paused for 30 days. And he says to see whether or not a final economic deal with Canada can be structured. And then he says in all caps, fairness for all. I think if we're reading into that a little bit, Sandy, this is part of what he believes needs to continue to be recalibrated, that trade imbalance that he continues to say is a big problem for the United States. We know that Canadian officials have said that there isn't a trade imbalance if you don't include oil and gas, which they obviously say that they always need, and Canada tries to pull out of the conversation. So Canada does have 30 days to continue to make this case to Donald Trump and to try and continue to say that this type of partnership that we have, this economic partnership, long-standing one, benefits both sides. We've heard from Scott Moe as well, the Premier of Saskatchewan, saying that the only person that is looking to put tariffs on right now is Donald Trump, and they have to spend the next 30 days to convince him that this is not a good option for either country.
Okay,
Sandy?
Mike. Okay, thanks so much for this. Now, we know that the Prime Minister and Canada's premiers were ready for anything, including a boycott of American booze. With a reprieve, as Mike was saying, things are changing, things are in flux. Now, we've heard that Ontario's premier is pulling back on that threat. Let's bring in CTV's Heather Wright, who's with us now. Heather, everything happening fast and furious. So what's Ontario's position at this point?
Well, it was at about this time, Sandy, that we were expecting to see American booze, wine pulled off the shelves of LCBO stores across the province. We have confirmation now from Ontario Premier Doug Ford that that is on pause, that those products are going to remain on shelves. Ontario, of course, being one of a number of provinces that had vowed to pull American booze off their shelves in response to this tariff threat. But we have also heard from the Premier of Ontario saying that they are still ready and willing to act should those tariffs come down the pipe in 30 days. He also, in a statement posted online, referred to the uncertainty that all of this is causing to businesses here in Ontario and across the country. When they're dealing with contracts, that Starlink contract with Elon Musk company, it is also still not being scrapped. But again, Ontario's premier saying he's very eager, and not eager, but ready and willing to remove American booze from LCBO store shelves should he need to. Of course, that is not something that Doug Ford says he wants to do, but it is still a response Ontario is willing to make should these tariff threats be, realized in 30 days from now. But for now, Ontarians will still be able to buy American booze at LCBO stores, Sandy.
Thank you for that. Now, before the reprieve earlier today, Donald Trump was saying, as he has said on many occasions, that Canada is not good to us. And he rhymed off a lot of reasons, including a claim that American banks can't operate in Canada. Well, since that comment, the Canadian Bankers Association has issued a response, and it reads in part, Canada has a strong and competitive banking sector comprised of both domestic and foreign banks. There are 16 U.S.-based bank subsidiaries and branches with around $113 billion in assets currently operating in Canada. U.S. banks now make up half of all foreign bank assets in Canada. Okay, stock markets earlier this morning were significantly down until Donald Trump gave Mexico a one-month reprieve, and then investors were a little more optimistic because the announcement of Canada happened afterwards. We really don't know at this point whether that will be a continuing move for the markets to recover. But the Canadian dollar, that's a whole other story, falling to its lowest level in 20 years. CTV's John Vanavalu-Rao now on the markets, the depressed loonie, and Canada's economy going forward. John.
Sandy, for investors, it was a rough start to the week. The loonie sinking even lower and predictions of even more market mayhem to come.
As stock markets opened in North America, the initial sell-off was intense as a looming trade war unnerved some investors.
This is chaotic. As we all know, there's chaos out there. There's no question about it.
In Europe and Asia, some markets fell close to 2% on fears the trade war would go global. While Toronto's main index initially dropped about 3% or 700 points.
Yeah, well, we certainly woke up to fear, and the fear was caused by Donald Trump doing what Donald Trump does and trying to create leverage.
That fear also hitting hard an already beleaguered loonie.
Well, it's had a very wild ride. At one point overnight, it got down to its weakest level in well over 20 years. It got below 68 cents.
In fact, compared to when Donald Trump was elected in November, at its low this morning, the loonie had lost 5% of its value versus the greenback. And some think it'll fall further if a trade war lasts a year.
Our best assumption is it would probably approach the mid 60-cent range.
And if a trade war gets worse, some economists think the loonie could dip towards the all-time low back in 2002, worth just under 62 cents. After the deal to delay tariffs with Mexico was announced, markets did recover somewhat, with experts saying investors need to brace for more volatility.
We have to be ready for perhaps more fear-mongering. But again, just take it easy. This will pass, and good companies prevail.
And their advice to investors, don't get caught up in panic selling. Sandy.
And that is good advice. John, thank you. Coming up after the break, shopping with a maple leaf in mind.
First thing I do are the supermarkets. I pick up, okay, if that tomato sauce has been in the U.S., I'm going to lay it back on the shelf.
So if you're interested how to stick to the Buy Canadian movement, which is spreading across the country like wildfire. Plus, combing for clues in the retrieved wreckage of a downed passenger jet. So a last-minute reprieve, Donald Trump agreeing to extend the deadline for tariffs, or those sweeping tariffs against Canada, for at least 30 days. In the interim, there's been a major push to buy Canadian in response to the potential threat. Some people are canceling trips to the United States. Others are on the hunt for products that are specifically Canadian-made. And that's something that's proven to be a challenge, largely because the supply chains are so integrated. We asked CTV's Alison Bamford to help decipher made in Canada from American products. Alison.
Sandy, buying Canadian isn't as cut and dry as it used to be, and it might require a little extra research depending on how much Canadian content you want in your products. Labels that say made in Canada mean at least 51% of that product's direct costs were incurred in the country. That could include raw materials, labor, or manufacturing. A product of Canada label puts the Canadian content at 98%. But lines can get blurry when we're talking about a Canadian retailer owned by an American company.
Look at Hudson's Bay. Hudson's Bay is a Canadian company, operates in Canada, but it's owned by an American investment firm. You got to be careful too, because you might say, okay, I'm going to go after this American company, but they have a factory in Canada and they employ hundreds of people.
There are helpful lists circulating on social media that offer alternative brands to popular American ones. Old Dutch chips instead of Lay's, or Armstrong instead of Kraft cheese. There are also websites like madeinca.ca that highlight Canadian products. Some stores are also trying to make it easier on their customers. Loblaw says it has plans to secure more food grown and made in Canada, and other grocers are putting up additional signs to make it easier for shoppers to tell which products are Canadian. Online, Shopify is doing something similar with its app, and Amazon has a Made in Canada products tab on its homepage. Sandy?
Thank you, Alison. Liberal leadership candidate Mark Carney was on CNN today, and he defended Canada's trade relationship, that is, with the U.S., and he hit back against Donald Trump's claims that we're responsible for a massive trade deficit.
The deficit is entirely caused by imports of Canadian oil. We provide 60% of your imported oil. Your refineries are geared for that oil. The U.S. runs a trade surplus on all other goods and services.
Carney went on to say that if the U.S. wants to change that relationship, Canada can choose to change who it trades with as well. Now, European leaders are also promising a firm response if the EU becomes Donald Trump's next tariff target. Trump has warned EU countries could be next in the line of fire, but he didn't say when. EU leaders at an informal summit today said they will be prepared to fight back, but they also called for reason and negotiation. The United States is the European Union's largest trading partner and consistently exports more to the U.S. than it imports. And China's government is promising action against Donald Trump's 10% tariff on that country. Beijing hasn't specified what countermeasures it may take, but plans on a symbolic gesture, filing a lawsuit with the World Trade Organization. China calls the U.S. tariffs, quote, a serious violation of international trade rules. Well, it was a snowy day. We have some other news of this day other than tariffs to share with you now. A snowy day in several school districts and post-secondary schools were closed through BC's lower mainland today because of all that snow. Area's been hard hit by a blast of winter weather. It's also dealing with plunging temperatures. Forecasters say Metro Vancouver will be 5 to 8 degrees below seasonal this week. Extreme cold warnings are in place in BC's southern interior, where wind chills could hit minus 45. And as we head to break, the foundation behind Canada's most coveted literary prize has parted ways with its partner of 20 years. The Giller Foundation thanked its lead sponsor, Scotiabank, in a statement without addressing the reason for the split. In 2023, there were protests and literary figures began boycotting the Giller Prize. They objected to a subsidiary's ties to an Israeli arms maker. Scotiabank said by email today that it had no comment. Still ahead, locked out from helping those in need. Inside Donald Trump's move to shut down a major foreign aid agency. Elon Musk says work is underway to shut down the U.S. Agency for International Development.
As we dug into USAID, it became apparent that what we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a bowl of worms.
Staffers were told to stay out of the agency's Washington headquarters today after Musk said Donald Trump agreed with him to shut it down. USAID is the world's largest single donor. In 2023, it sent out $72 billion in assistance worldwide. Donald Trump has ordered a global freeze on most U.S. foreign aid. Now, protests against Donald Trump's immigration crackdown have erupted in several U.S. cities. Thousands of people demonstrating against raids and mass deportations even blocked off a major highway in Los Angeles for several hours. Many marchers carried Mexican flags and signs opposing the president's immigration policies. The protests have been largely peaceful. Recovery crews have removed the first major pieces of wreckage from the deadly mid-air collision in Washington, D.C. Large cranes and lifts at the Potomac River crash site have been pulling up parts of the aircraft, including a jet engine, out of the water. Officials say more bodies will likely be recovered from the wreckage. Preliminary flight data now suggests there was a major discrepancy in altitude readings between the American Airlines plane and the military helicopter. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is preparing for a meeting with Donald Trump.
In this meeting, we'll deal with the important issues, critical issues facing Israel and our region. A victory over Hamas, achieving the release of all our hostages, and dealing with the Iranian terror axis and all its components.
Netanyahu spoke to reporters as he boarded a plane from Israel. He'll be the first foreign leader to visit Donald Trump since his inauguration in January. The visit comes at a critical time with talks expected this week on the next phase of the ceasefire in Gaza. After the break, standing on guard for how the trade dispute is triggering patriotism with more glowing hearts. The The award that has eluded Beyonce her entire career finally went to the pop superstar at the Grammys last night.
I just feel very full and very honored. It's been many, many years.
25 years to be precise after her first nomination as part of Destiny's Child. Beyonce won Album of the Year for her 8th solo record, Cowboy Carter. Among other key moments, Toronto's The Weeknd made a surprise return to the Grammy stage, ending his 4-year boycott. And Chappell Roan was crowned Best New Artist. She then used her speech to demand change in the music business, calling for a living wage and health care. So just to recap, it's been quite a day in this country. Donald Trump has given Canada at least a 30-day reprieve from those threatened tariffs. But he's already sparked a strong sense of patriotism among Canadians and a desire to band together. CTV's Paul Hollingsworth is in Halifax now on what has become a defining moment for our country. Paul.
Sandy, you could call this a groundswell, and many are saying they are enjoying watching people in our country come together. Canadians in massive numbers are highlighting their level of frustration, patriotism, and national pride.
It's nice to see Canadians, give a punch back. It's nice to even see Justin Trudeau give a little punch back.
For some, it's music to their ears.
I think so. I hear people talk about how they want to stand up for Canada and be strong.
Others have adopted a buy local strategy as a pushback against the U.S. president.
I pick up. Okay, if that tomato sauce has been in the U.S., I'm going to lay it back on the shelf.
Some Canadian sports fans went the extra step of booing the American national anthem in several cities.
I loved it. They did it in Vancouver. They did it at the Ottawa game. They did it in Toronto Raptors, and I think it's super cool. Just to show them, like, hey, we're your closest allies, and, it just shows them we're here, and we're going to fight back.
To suggest booing the Star-Spangled Banner represents the majority opinion of Canadians might be a stretch, but it's a loud statement that has generated a lot of attention, and those living south of the border have taken notice.
Whether this is representative of all Canadians, I would be hesitant to say so. It's not just the 17,000 people or whatever who are at the game, right? It's instantly on social media, news outlets pick it up, it travels across the world.
Historically speaking, one could argue Canadians have always had a strong sense of patriotism, but not in a loud and robust way. This surge in reaction over the past several days especially is something we are not used to seeing. Sandy.
And nice to see you too. Okay, Paul, thank you. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. Thanks for sharing your time with us. See you tomorrow. Bye.